What is up, harvesters? Welcome back to the returning viewers, and if you're brand new here, welcome to Hobby Harvest. My name is Ken. So today I want to talk to you guys about good stand locations versus bad stand locations and what you're looking for when you're putting those stands out in the woods and selecting a site for that next stand out there. Or maybe you need to evaluate your current stands and see if maybe they should get tweaked a little bit before the next season. So the first thing I want to talk about is how these stands are relating to the things, the attractions, everything that you guys have out there in the woods. So when we're hunting, we're typically placing our stands in relation to either a bedding area, which is going to be representative of a morning hunt, or to a food source, which is going to be representative of hunting in the afternoon. So when we're thinking of these things, the number one tip is you do not want to set up directly on top of those attractions. So when you're hunting a bedding area in the morning, you don't actually want to be in the bedding area. And the reason being, those deer are going to come back to that bedding area. And if you're not a brown it's down hunter, they're going to bed down. They're going to be possibly right underneath you. And now you have no option but to bust them out in order to slip on out of there, or wait for them to leave at some point, which may not be until the afternoon. And there's no reason to hunt a bedding area in the afternoon. You should be hunting that food source. So same thing in the afternoon. Don't set up your stand location right on top of that food source. Instead, you want to be set up on the lines of movement into those attractions. One, so that they actually get to you before they get to those attractions. So a lot of times, especially with an afternoon hunt, you may notice that those deer aren't getting to that food source till after dark. So you want to be set up on that line of movement into that food source, because they're going to get to over here a lot faster than they're going to get to over here. They may get to you before it gets dark out. Not always, but there's definitely a higher chance of it. And especially with those mature bucks, I've noticed a lot of times they like to come into a food source and just hang out over here and then move into the food source after it gets dark out. So if you're after those big bucks, you need to be over here, not over here when you are hunting those. So what we want to look for in these situations is, of course, if you can create a funnel, create man-made deer trails that lead in and out of these areas. I have other videos on how to specifically do that, but that's a good way to actually know specifically which trail they're coming in and out of these areas on, and make them go through that one that you have your stand set up on. So the reason you don't want to be directly on the food source is, of course, you can blow them out. So the deer feel a lot more on edge when they're on like an open food source. Even if it is like a safe and secure, like kind of tucked in food plot, it's still open on the food plot itself, and you don't need that extra scent out there, whatever, making them feel like they don't need to come back. If you blow them out one time, it's gonna be a long time before they come back. Those does and fawns, they'll come back maybe in a few days. Those bigger bucks though, man, they can maybe come back 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks later before they're going to hit that up again. So depending on how much time you have to hunt, what your season looks like, it could really be detrimental to blow them out of that location without ever getting a shot on them, because it's going to be a while before they come back. Now, there is an exception to this rule on small parcels. So in my southeastern Wisconsin parcel that I hunt, I have only about 1.5 acres of control on the very back of a residential property there. So what I have there is a food attraction with a stand on that food attraction, but that's just because it's a small parcel. So if you're only dealing with a couple acres, this might not 100% apply to you, because you're going to need an attraction and you're going to need to hunt that parcel. You may not be able to sit 100 yards off in the woods off the edge of a food plot waiting for those deer to filter into it right before dark. So in broad generalities here, when we're talking about bigger parcels, public property, if you are hunting food sources, bedding areas, make sure you are set up on the transportation highway into and out of those locations, not on the actual attraction itself. And we can expand this a bit even to like scrape lines. Like, let's say you're hunting public, you go out, you find a scrape out there, and you're like, great, I'm gonna set up right on this scrape. I'm gonna kind of trim the branches away a little bit. I'm gonna set a camera up on, I'm gonna put my stand up right here. Well, you just completely destroyed that whole area. You put all of that scent in the woods, all that human activity in the woods. That buck who was running that scrape line is going to come back and be like, this isn't what this looked like when I was here last. There's all this scent on these branches. What's this box staring me in the face? What's that thing doing over there? So you really want to be set up more on the way in and out of these areas than actually on top of them. So if you were trying to set up on a scrape line on public, set your stand up 25 yards away. I know that probably is a little close when you were talking about not disturbing the immediate area. You can make a 25-yard shot to that scrape Yet set your camera up down the trail a little ways further, so he's not actually standing right in front of that camera. He'll pass by it, so you'll still get photos or videos of him, but you don't want to disturb him when he's feeling vulnerable because he's got his head down. He's not really paying attention to his surroundings while he's messing with that scrape. So don't scare him off by putting that cam there, by breaking branches and whatever in the area, creating your shooting lanes. You need to keep those attractions very sacred and hunt the lines of movement in and out of those, and that's how you're going to be able to keep those attractions as top priority attractions that the deer continue to use. So the second example of what a bad location is any stand location that silhouettes you against the background. So this can be a climber stand, a ladder stand. This can be a box blind that you built. You do not want to be able to stand where you anticipate the deer being, look up at your stand and just see it completely silhouetted against the background. Now, the stand itself doesn't necessarily have to be in like thick cover, completely brushed in or whatever, but you want there to be a backdrop behind it. So imagine like this board behind me. I kind of blend into the board a little bit more, but if I slide over here, you can see how I'm silhouetted, or over here, the edge of my head gets silhouetted outside of that a lot more. So you don't want the background to be just something clean and open. You want it to be other branches or whatever that are hiding you from your arm looking like an arm, or the edge of your cap looking like a cap, whatever it is, or the stand itself. So you don't want the stand itself to be silhouetted, and that sticks out like a sore thumb out there in the woods too. So you really want to make sure that there's a backdrop behind your stand so that they're well hidden in the woods. Now, if you're building a box blind, a lot of times a good thing to do is to place it on the edge in like a thicket. So we all hopefully know that deer use edge and thick cover to travel. So you don't typically see deer out in the middle of a wide open field. You know, you'll be driving down the highway. Now that I'm thinking about it, a good example of a bad stand location is that big box blind out in the middle of a field. Like, it's not 100, 200, it's 300 yards to the nearest tree line. Now, yeah, those guys are out there and they're rifle hunters and they're taking those 100, 200, 300 yard shots. But you don't need to do that. Put your stand where the deer are, and you don't need to shoot that far. Even with a rifle, they'll walk right in front of you, right underneath you. I have it happen all the time. My average shot on a deer with my rifle is well under 100 yards. But that's because I hunt where the deer move. I don't need to see them really, really far away and then hope that I get a shot on them. I know a lot of hunters, that's a big misconception. The more you can see, the more you can shoot. That is not the case. Hunt where the deer are. It doesn't matter if you can see hundreds of yards off in every direction. They will come right underneath you, and you can, of course, harvest them there. But when you're setting up these box blinds, you want them tucked into that thicket. You want them to be kind of brushed in with the natural vegetation. So the edge of woods are going to have more vegetation growth because they're not only relying on the sunlight to shine from top down, they get that side sunlight coming in as well. So when that's happening, the edges of that woods are really thick. That's a good place to tuck in a box blind, or any stand, ladder stand, climber stand, whatever you guys are using. Though that's a good place to hunt because those are a lot thicker. You can get tucked in there a lot better. And of course you have the backdrop of the rest of the woods beyond so that you're tucked in. You're not being silhouetted out there. So set yourself up there. Good place to throw a mock scrape or something out on the edge of that field, so the deer do specifically come in front of you on that edge, or want to travel along that edge, and they'll get to you, choose to come to you because that mock scrape's there. But just make sure that you guys are not this big blob out in a tree. The deer will see you. They don't tend to look up that much, but if you stick out that much, they will look up and they will see you, and they're not going to want to come anywhere near you. So another example of a bad stand location is just simply not taking into account the wind and the thermals that blow around the area that you're putting the stand in. So a lot of times when we're in the northern hemisphere, we are going to have a predominantly west wind. But as we head further into fall and into winter, that's going to shift more to a northwest wind. So make sure you're accounting for that where you're at and which part of the country you're in. Now, there are websites you guys can go check out that'll tell you where your historical winds come from each time of the year. So if this is more of an early bow stand, a rut stand, or a gun season stand, you can kind of figure out where your wind should be coming from that time of year. Of course, the wind can blow from any direction though, so A lot of times what I'm thinking about in these situations is, let's just say that you have your stand set up on the west side of a food source. So even if you're following my first tip and having that location 100 yards off of that food source, but that food source is 100 yards to your east, meaning your predominant wind's blowing straight at it. And since food sources are an afternoon sit, let's also say that that food source is maybe down in topography beneath you a little bit. Well, your thermals are going to be dropping in the afternoon as the day is cooling off. So now what's happening is your wind's blowing directly at that food source and your thermals are dropping down into it. Now, if we reverse this quick, where that's not a food source, that's a bedding area, and this is the morning, now your thermals are rising up over that bedding area that's down in that low spot. This is okay. Now your wind is actually in the right spot to get up and over that bedding area. But let's go back to if that was a food source. Now the problem with this is you're dumping all your scent in there. So even if you're waiting for the deer to come from further into the woods before they get to that food source, again, let's say you're not a brown it's down hunter, you have doe and fawns, they come through, they get to that food source, they blow you out, they blow the whole woods out. That buck's not coming to where that doe just blew all over the place in there. So you want to make sure you're not dumping scent onto the attraction. So the thing that I would do in this situation, if for whatever reason you're like, I can't hunt on the other side of the food source because the deer come from this side, what I would do is instead go like 50 yards north, go like 50 yards south, put 2 stand locations up. So now you're not directly in that like west wind coming into the food source. You can now have, if you have say a northwest wind or you have a southwest wind, you can pick the stand that's going to blow that wind away from that food source and hunt that one instead. Now, yeah, if you're trying to create certain funnels coming in and out of that food source, maybe you need to create 2 funnels coming in and out, and you got to just hope that the wind is in your favor and that they're going to pick to walk in front of the one that you're in front of that day. Deer hunting's all about luck. You're not going to shoot a deer every time you sit. If you are doing that, let the rest of us know what you're doing, because clearly that's not the norm. The idea of deer hunting is spend a lot of time in the woods and you end up getting something, hopefully. But hopefully if you follow these tips, that amount of time you spend in the woods will instead be like this. It'll be a little smaller. We can shorten your time in the woods to be successful. But just make sure you are setting up these stand locations with the wind and the thermals in mind. And potentially you might need to set up 2 different stand locations where you hunt this one in this wind and this one in this wind. So that's a good thing to just keep in mind while you're getting out there to set these up. So the next thing is your morning and your afternoon stands. We already talked about this a little bit, but I want to get into it a little bit more. So there is no such thing as an all-day sit stand. The idea of sitting all day is really not a good idea. Yes, you can do it. You know, I talked to the Wisconsin DNR at one point, and they said that the middle of the day is actually a good time to hunt because the other hunters are getting out of their stands to go get something to eat, and they might spook deer toward you. Yes, that's true, but if you are relying your middle of the day hunt completely on other hunters scaring deer toward you, we probably need to be talking about something else, because I like to talk about what we do to make deer come to us that isn't reliant on other hunters being poor hunters. So what we want to do here is make sure that we know that that morning sit is going to be related to that bedding area, and that afternoon sit is going to be related to that food source, and that's your morning and your afternoon sit. Now, there are some locations, some stands that are good morning sits and good afternoon sits. I have one that I created on my northwestern Wisconsin property, and how I did that is I have food sources that are near it, and there is thick cover near it. So I have deer that bed down not that far from the food source. So because the food source and the bedding area are very close to each other, they can be both a morning and an afternoon sit. Now the problem with that is these deer are always going to be within 100 or 200 yards of you when you get in and out of that stand. And it means that your ingress and egress has to be perfect. And in this situation, I come off the edge of the road, I go down into a low area of topography, and I come back up on the backside of a hill to get into that stand. So any of the deer that are out there further into the woods where the food sources and the bedding areas are cannot see me whatsoever as I'm coming in. Now, of course, I have to be conscious of my thermals and my wind and my noise as I'm getting in and out of there. They shouldn't see me based on how I set the stand up, but if they can smell me or hear me, they're going to be gone too, or they're just not going to come towards me when they get up out of their bedding areas. If you guys didn't know this, if deer are in a good enough bedding area, they will sit tight like a pheasant sits tight in thick cover until you get very close to them to bust them out. Now, some of them won't. They'll just slip out as soon as they get the first scent of you, but others will sit tight and go, I don't know if they see me yet. So they wait for you to get closer and closer. But the problem is if they did have a bit of caution, they heard you, they smelled you or something, they may stay sitting there, but when they get up and get ready to move before dark, they're gonna go the other way. They're not gonna come towards where that noise was or where that scent came from. So just keep in mind that you can have a morning and afternoon stand in the same spot. You're gonna need both bedding and food. The other thing could be that you do have food through a thick travel network through the woods. So deer, in the morning when they're returning to their bedding areas, are going to go through that thickest part of the woods for cover. And if that happens to be along this line to get to their bedding area that's maybe a quarter mile that way, but you also happen to throw some food in there, like a food plot, or there's just some regenerative growth or whatever in that area, because regenerative growth is also going to be thick cover, that might end up being something that is both an AM and a PM sit for you. But very rare. Most situations you're going to have either the bedding area sit or the food area sit. And again, hunt adjacent to those. Don't hunt directly over them if you can help it. Now, the next thing is just be careful on that ingress and that egress. Talked about it a little bit, but you do not want to be walking through attractions or places where you expect the deer to be when you're getting in or out of your stand location. You want to be going through an open field, like I talked about that earlier. We don't expect the deer to be walking through an open field to that guy's blind that's out there 300 yards from the nearest wood line. He's not going to have deer walk right under him, but it is a good place for a hunter to walk to get out of that thick area that's 300 yards over that way where you should be hunting, to get back to your truck or your house or whatever. Now, the other thing is you can go through big open hardwoods. So if you're in big open hardwoods, the thickest part of those hardwoods, there's going to be some areas that are thicker than others. The deer are going to move through those thicker areas. They're not going to move through those big open, wide open, mature tree areas where there's no underbrush whatsoever. So a good area is to walk out through those big open areas, hunt adjacent to those thicker areas. And that's pretty much what you want to keep in mind. Don't walk through a bedding area to get to an afternoon sit that's adjacent to a food source, because the deer will be in those bedding areas in the middle of the day. You don't want to spook them out. You want them to stand up naturally on their own and then come to that food source. You are not going to out sense a deer. A deer is going to see you, hear you, and smell you way before you do. Even if you have a rifle that can shoot as far as you can see, they are going to see you, hear you, and smell you way before you can see them. And they're going to be in the thickest area of the woods that you're not going to be able to see them until you get right on top of them anyway. The idea of being able to see hundreds of yards away into a deer's bedding area just means that is not a very good bedding area. It should be so thick that while they're bedded down in there, you're not going to be able to see them. Now, yeah, other times, especially if you're in the far north, you are in those more mature wooded areas. If it's cold out, those deer will be on the out of wind side of a hill in the sun during the day, and that may put them into the open. You may be able to peek over a ridge and get a shot at them if you want to do more stalking style of hunting. I, of course, do a lot more sitting. I've found way more success with that. But if your attention span isn't that great, that is a good way to stalk hunt on those cold days, is to come up on the shadow side of the hill, look across, and maybe they'll be bedded down on the out of wind side of the sunny side of that slope, just trying to stay warm. But otherwise, most of the times these deer are going to be bedded down in that thickest area of the woods. Don't be busting through there to get to your stand. Make sure you're going where the deer are not to get in and out of those stands. You guys should see a successful hunt this next season. We're getting to the tail end of the bow season here in Wisconsin. If you guys have not gotten a deer yet, I wish you luck. If you did get something, let me know what you got down below. I actually got a nice 8-pointer this year during gun season, and then another nice 8-pointer was shot at that same stand 2 days later. So we had a really good stand set up for that. It's a good time of year to start planning next year's hunt. If you guys feel like you got some value out of this video, go ahead, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. If you enjoyed this video, YouTube really thinks you're going to enjoy this one. Otherwise, go check out this one, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.